2016, nearly 250,000 members have been initiated at 223 chartered chapters across the nation. The Cornell chapter, Der Hexenkreis, is one of the Society's oldest and founding chapters, as it was established in 1892. Mortar Board provides opportunities for continued leadership development, promotes services to colleges and universities, and encourages lifelong contributions to the global community. Additionally, Mortar Board offers numerous benefits and opportunities to its members, including career networking, fellowships, and awards. The last lecture series is a distinct event held each year by Mortar Board. We invite an esteemed faculty member to deliver what would, hypothetically, be their last lecture in academics. Previous speakers have included Paul Cherrick in the Department of Chemistry, Alice Hansen in the Department of English, and Brian Earle in the Department of Communication. Professor Brian Wansink is in the field of marketing and nutritional sciences. He is best known for his work on consumer behavior, and specifically on food psychology and behavior, which focuses on how microenvironments influence what and how much people eat and how they enjoy it. Professor Wansink holds the John S. Dyson Endowed Chair here at Cornell, where he is the director of the Food and Brand Lab. He is the first author of over 100 academic articles and books, including Marketing Nutrition and the best-selling book, Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think. He is also the 2007 recipient of the Entertaining Ig Nobel Prize. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce you this year's last lecture speaker, Professor Brian Wansink.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm very pleased to be here tonight to talk about mindless living. Now, when I put this up as a title, somebody said, so like mindless living, it's on Halloween, so you're going to talk about the zombies and stuff? No. Okay. What I'm going to talk about is my first reaction when somebody says, we would like you to give your last lecture talk. And then it's like, oh my God, how gruesome. I'm trying to imagine the last thing you'd say. So when I asked him, I said, what exactly do people talk about when they do this? And I talked about half a dozen people, and about half said, well, people talk about what they summarize all their research. And about the other half said, well, people just talk about what's really important to them in life that they would want to leave other people. You know, that's fairly undiagnostic, so I said, let me talk to the smartest person in the world, see what he has to say. Well, that person is my younger brother, who's also a professor. I called him, I said, Craig, have you ever heard of something called the Last Lecture Series? He goes, yeah. He says, we got him here. I said, so what do I do? And Craig goes, well, it depends. About half the people talk about their research, and the other half talk about their words. So that didn't leave me with much, but here's kind of what I thought. There's research lessons. Some of the more recent ones are ones that were in mindless eating. There's also life lessons. And in trying to disentangle which of the two I would talk about, I thought that what I'd really do tonight is I'd split this into two parts. I'd do an abbreviated first part that just talks about a couple things that I learned in my research that I think are applicable across a lot of different aspects of life. But then I'd spend the last part talking about some life lessons I've learned, in particular 3 mistakes I've made that I hope my daughters, or I hope you, never have to make or face in your life. Now, on Sunday, I give a talk at the American Heart Association, and it's a keynote address, and they're supposed to have over 12,000 people at that keynote address. I have spent less long preparing for that talk than I have this one, because that's such a hard thing to talk about. But here we go. Let's talk about research lessons. I'm going to talk about 3 mindless myths. And I'm really fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of really smart people in what I call the Food and Brand Lab, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But obesity ends up being a big problem. You've probably seen these maps like this, where like light blue represents states that have 10 to 14% obesity, and then it gets more and more and more. So you can see by the year of 2003, we're coming up with new colors to represent states that have over 25% of their people obese. Well, it's kind of an important problem, and the reason it's important is, I'll come back to this at the midpoint of my talk, that this is a last lecture in a very unusual way. It's because of a phone call I received at 4:10 last Friday when I was in Memphis, Tennessee. But to show this and put this in perspective, here's the problem with obesity. States are getting fatter, more red states. I projected this ahead. I projected what this is going to look like in the year 2025. Space age statistics. Here's what we have. Yeah. So it's a big problem. And the lab that I have, I'm incredibly fortunate to have. In fact, Lam's a member of the lab right there. Our purpose is to discover and uncover our food traps and to help people change them. Okay? We're partly about raising awareness, but we're really about how can we get people to change. We do all sorts of bizarre stuff, a lot of lab studies, things like this. But basically what we do is we bring people in and we change things to see how they respond differently if we have them meet with somebody who they're having a fight with versus somebody they agree with. What happens when they're playing music, when you play music they like versus music they don't like? What happens if we starve them for 24 hours and then let them choose food? Or what happens when we give them different sized plates? Let's take a look at an example here.
You ever eat a whole bag of chips and you're not even that hungry? Why? Well, maybe there's something going on that you're not aware of. Finding out what it is could help change the shape you're in. At Cornell University, diners head for lunch at what looks like a restaurant, but is really a lab where students prepare to observe those they eat. The diners are guinea pigs for research to uncover the secrets of our eating habits.
There's pasta. Bolognese.
Check out this test.
You can make as much as you want.
On this day, they tell the test subjects, you can have a free meal if you simply rate the food for us.
Have a good one.
Then the man in a blue shirt, acting as a waiter, says,
go ahead and get some water over there, I'll bring you right over.
That's an excuse for him to take the plate and secretly weigh it. There's a scale under that flowered cloth before bringing it to the diner and then doing this unappetizing thing.
That's gross.
To diner after diner.
I'll get you another plate, I don't feel comfortable I gave this to you.
That gets them to take a second plate and serve themselves again. But the trick is that the second plate is bigger.
Enjoy it.
This test is not about rating food, it's about whether people take less food when they have smaller plates. This woman thought she put more food in a smaller bowl.
I actually noticed I put more in a smaller pasta bowl than I did in the larger plate.
But the opposite is true. She and most everyone put 25% more food on the bigger plates. We're not aware.
Now this sets us up for the first myth I want to talk about. When we first started doing research in this area, I happened to be able to have a chance to give a talk at the Institute of Medicine down in Washington, D.C. Now, they have incredibly smart people there, and for some reason, all of them have a British accent. Okay? Now, now, they could be from Omaha, but it wouldn't matter. They still have some sort of British accent from, I guess, eastern Omaha. Okay? Now, I happen to parenthetically mention this thing about the plates, that you give somebody a larger plate, they end up putting more on, but they don't realize it. And somebody said in the audience, clearly, intelligent, informed people would not be influenced by something so mundane. Well, let's see. Those of us who are interested in nutrition, and those of us who are belonging to the American Dietetic Association, would love to have 90 minutes to tell people one thing about food. So I took that advantage. I had an MBA course I was teaching at the time, 60 smart, motivated, intelligent people, and I took 90 minutes to tell them one thing. What I told them was that if they were presented with a large gallon-sized bowl of Chex Mix, they would take and eat 40 to 50% more than if I gave them slightly smaller bowls. And that is, for 90 minutes, that's the one thing I got across. It's unbelievable. I lectured, there were demonstrations, I had videos, I broke them into small groups so they could decide how to not ever let that happen to them. We did interpretive dances together. And after an hour and a half, they were smart, they were informed, and they were not going to forget this. Until 6 weeks later, when I invited them back after Christmas vacation to a Super Bowl party. And the very simple thing was, I invited them to the Super Bowl party. When they came in, we split them off to one of two parallel rooms that were identical, where they got their snacks by picking up a plate and serving themselves. Now, in the room over on the left, the snacks were in gallon-sized bowls. What do you suppose the snacks were? Oh, it's just terrible. This is just so transparent. And here's what happened. They dished things up. They got down the end of the table. One of the researchers said, hey, can you fill out a little survey for me? And they go, yeah, I got to figure out someplace to put this plate here, though. Oh, look. There's a little corner on the table that was clear. Okay? They put it down, but they didn't realize there was a scale underneath the tablecloth, and the second they put it down, it showed how much they'd taken in the other room. Now, the parallel room on the other side was doing the exact same thing, except instead of having 3 big gallon-sized bowls of Chex Mix, they had 6 half-gallon-sized bowls. After the smoke cleared, we found that these people, taking from the big bowls, even though they were informed, intelligent, and educated, ended up taking and eating 53% more Chex Mix. But on the way out of the bar that night, this is in a place called Jillian's, sort of a sports bar. You might know them from your hometown. On the way out of the bar, we stopped and we said, hey, do you know that the people that took Chex Mix from this room, from the big bowls, took 50% more? Do you think the size of the bowl influenced you? What do you think people said? No, not going to possibly influence me. I'm too smart to be influenced by that. So we'd say, well, why is it then that you and some of the other people took 50% more? And they'd say things like, well, I didn't have lunch today. No. I didn't have breakfast today. Yeah, that's it. That's why I ate more. And this is the thing. These cues are so ubiquitous and so powerful that we believe we're too intelligent to be influenced by something as mundane as the size of a bowl or the shape of a glass or the lighting or the person next to us or the distance of a candy dish. And that's why these things have such an incredible influence, because we are too mindless to believe that we could be fooled by them. Well, the second myth I want to talk about is that people know when they've had enough. Now, this is alluded to a little bit earlier, and I had lived in France about 4 years ago. And when I was in France, it was interesting. I asked a number of French people, about 150 Parisians, how they knew when they were through eating dinner. Now I'm going to ask you that same question in just a second. But here's what the Parisians said. They said, I know that I am through when I no longer feel hungry. Or, I know I'm through when the food no longer tastes good. Now those are internal cues that are telling them when to stop. Moved back to the United States, went to Chicago, found 150 Chicagoans of the same gender and the same age, and asked them the same question. And they said, I know I'm through eating dinner when my bowl or plate is empty. Second thing was, I know I'm through eating dinner when everybody else has finished eating. The third was, I know I'm through eating dinner when the TV show I'm watching is over. Now, those are all external cues, and they're all cues that suggest that we continue to eat. And most of the cues around us, unless we make these small changes in our environment, end up leading us in that direction. Now, at about the same time as I was doing the bowls, I also did some glass stuff. And what was interesting, we showed that people pour a lot more in short white glasses than tall skinny glasses. And I showed that even bartenders end up overpouring by about 28%. I gave a talk to a big group in, I think it's Dallas, and there's dietitians, and one of the dietitians said, if even bartenders, if even professionals are fooled by these cues, what hope is there for the rest of us? The government needs to do something. Now, I don't know about the government, but within about 4 days of finding out that people pour more into short white glasses than tall skinny glasses, within about 4 days of finding that people poured a lot more into big plates and big bowls and small bowls, we had gotten rid of all the short white glasses and all the big plates in our lab. Within about 2 weeks, everybody in the lab had gotten rid of all those things in their home. So the key to reducing mindless eating is not to say, must not be fooled. The key is just to reduce and change your environment so you naturally, mindlessly do what works for you. Now back to our bowls. Do people know when they've had enough? What happens if our friends in Chicago, what happens if their plate or bowl never emptied? We set something up called the bottomless soup bowl. What we did was he took a bunch of soup bowls and drilled holes in the bottom of them, then drilled holes through tables, and then connected food-grade tubing from the bottom of that soup bowl into the big vat right there. Okay. Now on this side there's a vat, but the hole's drilled through a wall, about where we're sitting. Okay. Now, what we wanted to know is whether if we started giving people a soup bowl that never emptied, first of all, would they just keep eating until they, I don't know, blew up like the family dog? And second of all, would they realize they'd eaten more, or do we just end up using our vision as such a driver of estimation? Let me give you an idea what this looks like. I'll take a trip out to my garage here. There it is, yeah. Now, how many people think that if they sat down and ate out of a soup bowl, it continually refilled, that they'd figure it out? We all want to believe we're going to do that. But here's what happens. People take a couple scoops of soup, goes down, but the second they stop eating soup, the level imperceptibly starts to rise again. Oh yeah. And they can essentially nibble at that soup for the next week, but until they eat 6 quarts of soup, it's never going to hit bottom. Now, of all the people that did this, and we probably did this study with about 160 people in total, only 2 people ever discovered anything was going on. Okay? One person dropped a napkin and kind of went to pick it up and they saw this Borg-like tubing. Just, The second guy, this is more dramatic yet. The second guy, I guess, forgetting that he wasn't at like a medieval banquet, kind of started channeling the spirit of his ancestors, his Viking ancestors apparently, grabbed his bowl and picks it up like this. Now, this cord comes, it's filled with tomato soup, so this cord comes up to the snake, up to the table like a coral snake. And just people, the person across is tipping the chair over trying to get away, and the woman next to him is going, ah! And remember, this soup is pressure fed, and what happens if you mess with something that's pressure fed? So, those are the only 2 people. But the interesting thing about this is that if you look at the results, people ended up eating about 73% more soup if they had a refillable soup bowl, but if we asked them if they felt any more full, they would go, no. How can I possibly be full? I still have half my soup left. And this ends up being the real dangerous thing about thinking that we're a whole lot more smart than our environment is, because our environment wins almost every time. Now, it was interesting. I got a phone call like back in March, and it was from this person from Cambridge. He says, I would like to discuss something with you. And we played telephone tag for a while. And I said, hey, look, I got to give a talk at Harvard in a couple days. Why don't I just meet you for dinner then, rather than try to get back and forth on the phone? When we met, this is a guy who's in charge of the Ig Nobel Prize Awards. And how many people have ever heard of those? Oh, they're very funny. They sort of parallel the Nobel Prize Awards, except they're given to research that makes you laugh and then makes you think. Not all, it makes you think to varying degrees in some cases. But anyway, he said I was going to, did I win this and would I accept it? And I said in one word, absolutely. So that was this was just a short time ago, about earlier this month. So they have in Sanders Theater in Harvard. It's been sold for the last 9 years, I guess. And there's a couple really cool benefits of this, other than getting that bitchin'-looking chicken and egg award there from a real Nobel Prize winner. And one of the things is that, first of all, you get for 3 days, you give this little talk at Harvard, this really fun thing. then you do some stuff the next day, and then you give a bigger talk at MIT. So rather than hanging around Nobel Prize winners for 3 days, there's also another unexpected benefit. Benefit 1, parties with real Nobel Prize winners. Benefit 2 comes from your less suspecting attentive colleagues. Brian, what did I hear on NPR this morning about a Nobel Prize? Only caught part of it. Probably see you on Sunday if you're in town. That's the next big benefit of these things. Well, the last myth I want to talk about is that people know what they like. The French have an expression that there's no accounting for taste, and I think it's amazing how flexible our preferences are. And this goes back to something I did a while back when I got a call from this guy who's sitting down right there, and he's in charge of a huge string of college cafeterias. And he says, look, we're starting something new. It's a flagship program. We're taking all foods and we're making them healthy. But nobody's buying them. He says, what can we do? And we tried a bunch of different things, but I just want to talk about one thing. It was a 6-week study where what we did is we said, hey, wait a minute. You know what largely happens is we're very suggestible, and when we have the expectation that something's going to taste good, typically we believe it does unless we're totally proven otherwise. Okay, if we think it's going to taste miserable, our sensory detective abilities try to look for the things that taste miserable, and so we don't give it the benefit of the doubt. We expect it's going to taste miserable until grossly proven otherwise. Well, if that's the case, we might just be able to tweak a bunch of names of things and possibly get people to eat things they otherwise wouldn't like. So here's what we did. We took a bunch of menu items that were really fairly blasé items, and we took like the seafood fillet. For a couple of weeks, we'd be on the menu as a seafood fillet. And a couple of weeks, it'd be off the menu. Then for a couple of weeks after that, we'd put it back on. But we'd call it the succulent Italian seafood fillet. Now it's still basically a dried out fish stick. Okay. Actually probably dried out from 2 weeks earlier, but we gave it this cool name. Now the crazy thing is that just giving something a great name like this caused people, after they finished eating the meal, to not only rate it as tasting better and rating the restaurant as being more trendy and up to date, but they're also likely to believe that the cook had more European culinary training. Now, in reality, this guy had been fired from like Arby's a week earlier. But the thing is, there's actually no end to this thing. We would take chocolate cake. This is basically dried out sheet cake, okay? And we would rename it Belgian Black Forest Double Chocolate Cake. Now, it doesn't matter that the Black Forest is not in Belgium. Okay, people go, oh, you know, that's going to be the good stuff. I know it. They'd eat it, their taste would confirm it. We wanted to see how far we could stretch this, though. And we did the same thing with wine. And we've got something that's called a research restaurant. It's actually called the Spice Box, and people go there. They pay usually between $20 and $25 for a prefix menu. What they don't realize, though, they think what they're doing is rating some new recipes at the end of the meal. No. They just do that as a cover story. We just have them do that as a cover story. In reality, what we're doing is we're changing all sorts of things in the restaurant. We're changing the way the menu looks. We're changing the way we plate things. We're changing all sorts of things to see how it influences how much they like food, how much they eat, how long they eat. So we know that if you give people wine that they think is going to be terrible, when they drink it, they go, oh, it's terrible. We also know if you give people wine that they think is really good, they drink it, they tend to go, yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. Okay. So we did kind of a dirty trick. We bought a whole bunch of cases of this wine called Charles Shaw wine. Okay. It's sold for $2. What do they call it? $2 Chuck, yes. So we bought all this cheap wine, kind of took the labels off it and replaced it with labels that said it was either from California, a place known for wine, or with labels that said it was from North Dakota, a place not known for wine. Mm-hmm. And we weren't interested in what they thought about the wine. What we were interested in is in what that did to the rest of the meal. And people who thought they were drinking California wine, ended up spending longer eating the meal, they ate more of their food, they rated the food as better, and when we asked them to make reservations afterwards, they were more likely to make reservations to come back in the next 3 months. Our other friends, who instead believed they were drinking North Dakota wine, didn't have quite such a magical evening. Okay, they essentially ate quicker, they got out of there, they left more food in the plate, they didn't like the food as much, and we asked them, would you care to make reservations to come back? They'd say things like, oh, you know, this year things are really busy for me. Yeah, maybe for the next few years too. So I'm not eating, actually. No, in both cases, people drank about the same amount of wine. How much do you suppose that was? All of it. Okay. But they're drinking, oh, that was terrible. Is there more? No? Now you can say this and you say, well, that can happen to people, but you know, that wouldn't happen to me because I know what I like. And I just want to show a little something to see if it's really true.
Unbelievable how suggestible our taste is. Right, Wansink?
To demonstrate that, Wansink tricked some of our own staff, 7 of 2020's college interns. First, he added some chocolate sauce to vanilla yogurt. Then he told the students,
we're going to be doing a little strawberry yogurt taste test. Okay.
On the table, he had some strawberry yogurt containers.
You can put your blindfolds on.
The students put on blindfolds, tasted the yogurt, and then Wansink asked them to compare the strawberry tastes.
I think they both taste really strong strawberry.
All the students were certain they were eating strawberry yogurt.
This one has a much stronger strawberry taste to it.
Just tastes more like strawberry.
With this woman, Wansink tried something different.
We're going to be tasting a couple different kinds of yogurts today.
Okay.
He didn't tell her what flavor it was, so when he asked her to rate the strawberry taste,
Honestly, I didn't notice it's strawberry.
Okay, good.
and yet by the time I interviewed the group, she too accepted the idea that she'd eaten strawberry.
When you follow up with the question which one is more strawberry, I was I have to choose one.
They all believed it was strawberry.
Actually, none of them was strawberry. It was vanilla yogurt and chocolate sauce.
Stop.
I can't think.
Wait a minute, can't think.
Well, I thought I tasted strawberry. I guess also when I opened my eyes, the 2 yogurts in front had strawberry on the back.
I think your job's been checked out. I do. Because I feel like there was definitely a taste of strawberry.
No, it was vanilla yogurt with chocolate sauce.
But you thought it was strawberry.
It tasted like strawberry. I swear it did.
The moral of these stories, Wansink, is that we are much less taste sensitive than we think we are.
We don't want to really believe that we are duped or fooled by something as simple as
Now, right now, that's actually ending my last lecture portion on research. But what I want to turn to in just a moment is the last lecture that I would really give if it was the last day here. But I told you before that this last lecture thing was actually a fairly prophetic title for a talk, because I got a phone call last Friday at 4:10. This wasn't a tremendous surprise to me because I'd been expecting this, rather I'd been hoping for this for about the last 3 months. But it came last Friday, and by next Friday I will not be at Cornell, because that came from the White House. In that phone call, I was asked to be the executive director for the Center for Food Policy and Promotion. And it's a presidential appointment that starts a week from Monday, and it goes until the next administration comes in January 20th, 2009. At that time, on the 21st, I will come back and be a professor at Cornell, but for that year and some months, I'll be on leave. Now, this is basically the person or the office that's responsible for the dietary guidelines of 2010. They're responsible for my pyramid and all the new innovations of my pyramid, but they're also responsible for things that would never ever cross our radar screen, because we are fortunate enough to not be part of a WIC program or a food stamp program or a mandatory school lunch program. But that ends up being the part of the pyramid, of the economic pyramid, that this organization has a big impact on. And that's why I said it's very prophetic that I got that phone call, because this indeed is my last lecture before I pack up and go away for about a year and a quarter. Well, that leads me on to the next thing, and that is life lessons. And in life lessons, I think there's 3 mistakes that I've kind of made, and if I only had 3 things I could tell my daughters, okay, it would be these things. But clearly right now they don't understand anything. They understand milk, and that's kind of about the limit of it. There's only 3 things, this is what I'd say, but they're all based pretty much on ways that I've kind of screwed up in the past. And the first thing is I want to kind of turn the clock back 30 years to 1977. Does anybody recognize what album cover that's from? Born to Run, yes. That's Bruce Springsteen and Clarence Clemons. Now, that's them in 1977. In 1977, I was a senior in high school, looking forward to graduation. And there's basically 2 things that I liked. I liked sports and I liked music. Okay. But the problem was, in 1977, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I didn't think it was going to be college. In fact, I was going to join the Army. I was interested in joining the Army for one of 2 reasons, so that I could either play in the Army band or so that I could take photos, because I loved messing around in the darkroom. But I had a very bizarre experience in that I was a member of Junior Achievement, and they had something called the Business Bowl. It's kind of like a IQ Bowl or something like that. And I don't know, somebody must have been sick, and they asked me to substitute for that person. Well, what ended up happening is we ended up winning the State of Iowa Junior Achievement Bowl Award. And as a result, I got a $500 scholarship to go to college. And I thought, $500? They go, no. It's $500 to go to college. You just can't use this to buy like a new car. So I looked around and I found that there was a college that had credits for just, you could take a course, and it was only $19 a credit hour. Now, needless to say, this wasn't Cornell, or it wasn't Yale, or it wasn't Oxford. Okay. In fact, it's a college that I don't think I've ever met anybody on either 2 coasts who have ever heard of it. But I ended up going to this college for 1 year, thinking that I was going to get there, maybe do okay, and I'd see what happened after that. The problem was I struggled quite a bit that first year. I graduated in the bottom half of my high school class, and so when it came to college, even though it wasn't a great college, I wasn't very well prepared. In fact, this is a college, they had 2-year degrees there, but they also ended up having, for a science requirement, you could take a course like physics, or you could take auto tech. And I took an auto tech, and I got a B in it. So I wasn't really too well suited for the long term there. But somebody gave me a book that just transformed my life. And it's a book that people might laugh at, but it was called The Magic of Thinking Big. And I took this book, and I read through it, and just the whole thing struck me as brilliant. In fact, I would go through, and I think I just had my secretary copy a page out of it. I would go through, and every time I'd read it, I'd circle and underline things. I'd read it almost every night. My girlfriend, for about 3 years, we'd always be talking about parts of it and reading it. And it had this incredible impact on me, because somebody who has a C average and who decides to be a professor in their college at a not great school is tremendously, tremendously handicapped. But one thing I began realizing through this, and that's actually as a result of this experience, is that I've had the fortune to teach thousands, maybe not thousands, maybe 3,000 MBA students and a number of undergraduates over the last years. And even though these MBA students have been from 3 of the greatest Ivy League schools, I realized that the biggest failing they have isn't being overly confident and having too much swagger about what they can do. No. A lot of that's just an act, I believe. I believe the biggest failing of a lot of them ends up being the same feeling that I have. They set their sights way too low. But granted, their sights are still pretty high, but they're much lower than what actually their potential is. And I thought about this a lot because I see this happen to people over and over and over. It's not the level they set their sights with respect to their career. It can be with respect to who they want to marry. It can be with respect to what they expect out of their personal life. But I had a really cool experience just last Thursday night, and I was flying from Minneapolis to Memphis, and I had a nice seat in the airplane, and I happened to be sitting next to a film director. Now, I don't know that many film directors, but you recognize a few, and this is a person who'd been at Warner Brothers for a long time and is now at Paramount. And I had a chance to talk with this person for a while, and the person said that the biggest handicap that had kept her from progressing for much of her career wasn't that she set her sights necessarily too low. It's just that she knew she was very successful in staying within fairly circumscribed boundaries. So as long as she stayed within those boundaries, she could be an incredible success by most people's estimation. But if she risked anything at all, she risked failing. And she said it's only when she did that, started directing, that her life started turning around. So I think the one lesson I learned there has to do with setting your sights and actually looking twice at what it is that's keeping you within a comfort zone, even though that could be a very successful comfort zone. Now something happened, and a miracle occurred, and 10 years later, I was admitted in the PhD program at Stanford, which is pretty remarkable given my, let's say, absence of A grades in college. And but when I stepped foot on campus, I learned something very harrowing, and that is they were letting 4 people into my department, and they had a 50% failure rate policy, that after 2 years, they would take the 2 people who were doing the best, keep them, and the other 2 people, regardless of how well they were doing, bam, we're gone. And you kind of say, well, okay, well, we're kind of competitive people or we wouldn't be here. But I looked around me, and one of these guys actually already had a PhD from Cornell in psychology. I thought, no. Another guy had a master's degree from MIT and a second master's degree from Stanford. And I went, no. And then the woman who was there had been the valedictorian from Oxford in math. And like math is a real field, And she'd been getting a master's degree there. So I'm there with these 3 people, and of course in all the classes, I'm like kind of facing the wrong way, and I'm kind of, I feel like I'm drooling, and there's a Brian over here. And for 2 years, it was a tremendously terrible time. But something happened at the end of 2 years, which just, I said, well, is there any which was very terrible. And I got a call from the dean, and it's on Black Friday. It's the day that of every year when they kick out half the PhD students. And I got a call, and the dean said, I want to see you at, or the secretary said, I want to see you at 8:30 Friday morning. I remember that Thursday night, I invited all my friends over. And, it's like for a beer and pizza party, and pretty much said to them, look, this is happening tomorrow, and it's been great knowing you for these 2 years, and I'm going to find another PhD program, and so I think it's going to be fine, but maybe things weren't really meant to work out anyway. I remember getting up the next morning, and and I went to the restroom near where the dean's office was, and for like 20 minutes just stood in the mirror, kind of like washed my face, doing the eye of the tiger, And then at 8:30, I kind of went. And the dean said something to me which was kind of puzzling. He goes, I don't really know how to explain this. I'm like, okay, here it comes. But he said, oh man. He said, I don't know how to explain this, but he says, some donor gave some money to go to some PhD student who's going to be a professor, and he says, well, you're the only one here who's not getting any money, so I guess I have to give it to you. And I'm like, I thought, is this like a severance thing? I don't know. And I said, well, what about Harry and Henry? And he goes, oh, they're not going to be needing it. They're not going to be in the program next year. And I remember all but falling on my knees, being so grateful that this happened. And I said, who gave us money? Who gave it? And he goes, oh, it's this guy, Jerry Blum, down in Fresno. So I hopped in the car, an air-conditioned car, drove 4 hours down to Fresno, found this guy's place, tried to get in his office. Of course, they wouldn't let me. Then stalked him in the parking lot till he came out, just to say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, because I had gone in 24 hours from feeling like I was a man without the country to feeling that all of a sudden something was going to work right. Now, the crazy thing about this is he and I became tremendous friends, and it was, I would spend most of my holidays either at his home in Fresno overlooking the canyon, or his beach home, or his ski home, or one of his homes. And at one point, I had a very good friend who had just gotten promoted to partner for Bain & Company. It's a management consulting company, kind of a big deal thing. And to celebrate, I said, hey, let's go down to Fresno to see my friend and his wife. And she said yes, although in retrospect, she shouldn't have. We drove down there. We had a tremendous weekend there, but like on the second night of the weekend, I kind of went in to do something. We were having wine out in the veranda. I went in to get something. I came back, and he and my girlfriend are like screaming at each other. And the whole thing came down to something like this. He said, so you just got some sort of promotion with a partner at Bain & Company? Do you think that's a big deal? And she'd say, well, yeah, it's a big deal, because first of all, it's hard to get a job there. Second of all, it's hard to get promoted to manager. Third of all, it's even harder to get promoted to partner. And he said, it is not a big deal, because somebody who's been given as much as you have been given in life, anybody could have done that if they were given the breaks you were given. He said, what have you done that is unique, given the incredible set of skills and talent you'd been given? And I remember being speechless for some time. But I also remember shortly after that going back to a high school reunion. And then at high school reunion, they say, who's the big success at high school reunions? Well, there's a bunch of valedictorians and salutatorians that did as well as expected them to be. But I remember one guy who came up to me, and he had driven like 600 miles from where he's living in Indiana, and was the assistant manager at a plywood, Minnesota. And after talking to him, I believed he was the runaway success in my graduation class, because I wasn't even convinced this guy would have graduated from high school. And I tutored him a little bit and kind of nicely sort of almost gave up on him. The guy graduated, and relative to what he had been dealt in life, he was an incredible success. And I think the second lesson that I learned that I really like to pass on to my daughters, or pass on to you, is the fact that the benchmark that we should have when we look at success shouldn't be what the people around us are doing, because that's the wrong comparison set. The benchmark should be, how are we doing relative to what we've been dealt? And if we're making a unique impact that somebody couldn't have done who had been given the same benefits, I think that's a tremendous metric to use for success. At the time, when I first started here, somebody had asked me where would be the ideal place I wanted to teach. And I said, the perfect place in the world I want to teach, and this is just hearsay because I didn't know this for a fact, I said, is Dartmouth College. Because I think, from what I hear, that's a school that values both teaching and it values research. And that's kind of what I want to do, is both of those. So a miracle of miracles occurred when I came on the job market. And there was an opening at Dartmouth College, and I was able to get that job. So this is 1994. So that's one of the classes there. And for 4 years, there wasn't anybody happier in the world than me. I remember driving every day to work thinking that I was the luckiest person in the world. here it was, I had a home that was better than a home I could ever imagine owning in my life. I had 2 cars, I just loved to drive them both. I had this girlfriend who I really liked. I was really hoping that that was going to turn into something with kids and marriage and stuff. And all of a sudden, in an almost blindsided way, I was told I didn't get tenure. Now the thing is, if you don't get tenure, it's not like you say, well, I'll just try again next year. No, because next year you're not going to be there, okay? And getting turned down for something like that, if you don't anticipate it, really messes up your career, because it's almost impossible to get a job at another university right away unless you want to take a very big step down, because people kind of go, is something wrong? I mean, do you have like goats in the office or something? I don't know. Why didn't they give you tenure? And at the time, the only thing I could do is I had to take a job in the Netherlands at 1/3 my salary. So I went from a great home, 2 cars, this incredible girlfriend who I loved a tremendous deal, to living by myself in this 1-bedroom apartment in Amsterdam with carpet that was the thickness of felt. But, you know, that was great, and that was fine. And some kind of miracle occurred, and I found I was given an offer to go to the Wharton School of Business. And I went, woo, that's good. Because I was still stinging from the fact that when I got turned out from Dartmouth, they said, you know, you just study food, and nobody cares about food. Why don't you study something important, like international strategy? Well, I ended up at Wharton a few years later. As at Wharton a few years later, it's time for me to come up for promotion again. I went to the dean. I said, you know, here's what I want to do. I want to start a food and brand lab. And the dean said, you know, we're about global strategic technology. Where does food fit into that again? I'm like, good point. Well, a miracle happened. I was given a tenured offer to go to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. 5 years later, I had an offer to come here. I him-hawed around. 2 years after that, I had another offer to come here, and I came here. And that's sort of that progression. Now the thing is, I'm really minimizing this, because when this thing happened at Dartmouth, I was so knocked off my feet that I remember just reading anything I could, trying to regain my balance. And I remember one thing I read was this thing, a Chinese parable, where it's a parable about a farmer who has a horse. He's out with the horse breaks its leg, they have to put the horse down. The neighbor comes over and goes, oh, what a terrible thing, your horse is dead. Now you cannot farm. The farmer goes, well, it might be bad news, it might be good news, I don't know. Well, because the horse is dead, his son has to pull the plow. He pulls the plow one day, he slips and he cuts his foot really bad, and he gets laid up in bed. The neighbor comes over again and says, oh, what a terrible thing that's happened. Your son is now injured, nothing can be done, he's in bed, nothing can be done with the farm. The dad goes, well, could be good news, could be bad news, I don't know. A few weeks later, the Chinese army marches through town. They're picking up all the healthy men to kind of go fight in a glorious war that's going to bring honor back to the families. And the son can't go because of his injury. Neighbor comes over yet again and says, oh, what a terrible thing. Your son's crippled now and he can't go off and bring your family honor. And the dad goes, well, it could be bad news, could be good news, I don't know. What's interesting is you can probably guess the way the rest of the story ends. The Chinese army goes off to battle, they just get destroyed, and had his son been with the army, he would have lost his life and his dad would have lost his son. Now, I've been fortunate to have a lot of tremendous students, and I've been fortunate to have a lot of tremendous students who like to keep in touch with me. And I know that there's a bunch of people in this class right here who've had terrible things happen to them in their career. And I wish I could say that nothing bad or nothing unexpected will ever happen in your life, and I wish I could promise you that. I wish I could promise that to my daughters. But I know from the base rate of really talented people that the more they stretch, the more they try to be unique, the more they try to do something different, the more likely they are to fail. But I think what goes on in a lot of these cases is that it's not so much whether you fail or whether things go well, but it ends up being how you respond to what happens to you. And I want to kind of leave you with that because I hope nothing terrible happens to you ever in your life. But the odds against that happening are actually pretty low. But what you can control is how you respond to that. So those are my last words.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did, and happy Halloween. Thank you.